Marcus Hartwell stood at his kitchen window, watching the storm clouds gather over the Montana wilderness. His coffee had gone cold an hour ago, but he couldn't tear himself away from the view. 20 years of living on this remote homestead had taught him to read the sky like a book, and today's chapter promised trouble. The wind picked up, sending pine needles dancing across his wraparound porch. His nearest neighbor lived 40 miles away, connected only by a single dirt road that became impassable during heavy storms. Most people would find such isolation terrifying, but Marcus had chosen this life deliberately. After selling his tech company in Seattle for more money than he could spend in 3 lifetimes, he'd bought these 1,000 acres of pristine wilderness and built his dream home far from civilization's noise. The house itself was a masterpiece of sustainable living. Solar panels covered the south-facing roof, a wind turbine spun lazily on a hill behind the main building, and geothermal heating kept everything comfortable year-round. Marcus had spared no expense making his retreat completely self-sufficient. He had backup generators, a greenhouse, livestock, and enough stored supplies to last through any emergency. But even the most prepared homestead depended on some connection to the outside world. A buried fiber optic cable ran 23 miles through the wilderness, connecting his property to the nearest telecommunications hub. That single line was his lifeline for managing investments, staying in touch with his grown children, and running his charitable foundation. The cable company had charged him a fortune to install it, but Marcus considered it money well spent. Thunder rumbled in the distance as the first raindrops spattered against the window. Marcus finally turned away, heading to his home office to check the weather radar on his computer. The satellite internet backup was slow and unreliable, so he preferred using the fiber connection whenever possible. But when he clicked on his browser, nothing happened. He tried refreshing the page, then checked his network settings. No connection. Walking to his communications closet, Marcus found all the indicator lights dark on his fiber modem. He'd seen this before during severe storms. Sometimes falling trees damaged the buried cable, or lightning strikes fried sensitive equipment. Usually, the telecommunications company sent a repair crew within a day or two, but with a major storm approaching, it might be longer. The rain began falling harder, drumming against his metal roof with increasing intensity. Marcus decided to inspect the cable entry point on the north side of his house before the weather got worse. He pulled on his rain jacket and stepped outside into the growing storm. The buried cable emerged from the ground near his generator shed and ran along the foundation to enter his house through a weatherproof conduit. Marcus followed the line with his flashlight, looking for obvious damage. Everything appeared normal until he reached the point where the cable curved around a large boulder about 50 feet from his house. There, in the beam of his flashlight, he saw the problem. A massive pine tree, weakened by recent drought, had fallen across the cable path. The trunk was easily 3 feet in diameter and stretched nearly 100 feet long. Beneath it, Marcus could see the bright orange conduit that protected his fiber line, now completely crushed. He cursed under his breath. This wasn't a simple repair that the telecommunications company could fix with a splice kit. They'd need to excavate around the fallen tree, remove the damaged section of cable, and run a completely new line. In good weather, such work might take a week. During storm season, it could take a month or more. The wind was picking up now, driving the rain sideways across his property. Marcus trudged back to his house, already planning how he'd manage with limited connectivity for the foreseeable future. His satellite backup would have to suffice for essential communications, though the connection was barely fast enough for email and basic web browsing. As he reached his porch, a movement caught his eye through the storm. Headlights were approaching up his long driveway, moving slowly through the worsening weather. Marcus frowned. Nobody should be coming to his property, especially not in this storm. His caretaker lived in town and rarely visited without calling first. The few delivery services that reached his remote location never came during bad weather. The vehicle drew closer, and Marcus could see it was a utility truck with specialized equipment mounted on the back. The logo on the side door read Mountain States Telecommunications. He felt a surge of surprise and relief. Perhaps they'd detected the line failure remotely and dispatched a crew immediately. That was remarkably fast response, considering how remote his location was. The truck stopped near his house, and Marcus watched as the driver's door opened. Instead of the middle-aged technician he expected, a young woman stepped out into the storm. She was perhaps 30 years old, with short dark hair already plastered to her head by the rain. She wore the standard blue uniform of the telecommunications company, but her slight build made her look almost fragile against the backdrop of the massive storm. Marcus hurried down from his porch, raising his voice over the wind. "You picked a hell of a night to make a service call." The woman looked up at him, rainwater streaming down her face. "Are you Marcus Hartwell?" she called back. When he nodded, she continued, "I'm Elena Rodriguez, field technician with Mountain States. We got an automatic alert that your fiber line went down about 2 hours ago." "You came all the way out here in this weather?" Marcus asked, incredulous. "That's dedication above and beyond." Elena shrugged, pulling equipment from the back of her truck. "I was already in the area working on storm damage when the dispatch came in. Figured I'd check it out before the weather got too bad." She glanced up at the darkening sky. "Guess I waited too long." Marcus led her to the fallen tree, explaining what he'd found. Elena examined the damaged cable with a professional eye, running her hands along the crushed conduit and measuring distances with a telescoping rod. She made notes on a waterproof tablet, occasionally pausing to wipe rain from the screen. "You're right about this being a major repair," she said after completing her assessment. "I'll need to excavate around the tree, remove about 60 feet of damaged cable, and run a new section. In this weather, it's going to be challenging." "You don't have to do it tonight," Marcus said. "This storm is just getting started. It's going to get much worse before it gets better." Elena looked back toward her truck, then at the damaged cable. "I've got all the materials I need in the truck. If I wait until after the storm passes, it could be days before I can get back out here. Other emergency repairs will take priority." Marcus studied her face in the beam of his flashlight. There was determination there, but also something else. A kind of professional pride that he recognized from his own business career. This wasn't just about fixing a cable for Elena. It was about proving something to herself and others. "At least come inside and warm up first," Marcus offered. "Have some coffee and wait to see if the storm moderates." Elena hesitated, clearly weighing her options. The wind was growing stronger, and the rain had turned into a steady downpour. Finally, she nodded. 5 minutes. Then, I need to get started before this gets any worse." They hurried back to Marcus's house, Elena carrying a waterproof equipment bag. Inside, she stood dripping in his entryway, looking around at the spacious interior with obvious surprise. Most people reacted that way when they saw his home for the first time. From the outside, it looked like a large but simple log cabin. Inside, it revealed itself as a sophisticated blend of rustic charm and modern technology. "This is quite a place," Elena said, accepting a towel Marcus offered her. "I've been to a lot of remote properties, but nothing like this." Marcus poured coffee from his thermal carafe, handing her a steaming mug. "Built it myself over about 3 years. Well, I supervised the construction anyway. Always dreamed of having a completely self-sufficient homestead." Elena warmed her hands around the coffee mug, studying the view through his large windows. The storm was intensifying rapidly now, with lightning beginning to flash in the distance. "You really live out here year-round? All alone?" "Mostly alone," Marcus confirmed. "I have a caretaker who checks on things when I travel, and my kids visit sometimes. But, yes, this is home now." "Don't you get lonely?" Elena asked, then immediately looked embarrassed. "Sorry, that's personal. It's just that I can't imagine being so isolated." Marcus considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. But I spent 40 years in cities, surrounded by people all the time. This gives me space to think, to read, to work on projects that matter to me. The solitude is actually a luxury." Elena nodded, though she still looked skeptical. She finished her coffee quickly and set down the empty mug. "I should get started on that cable repair. Thanks for the coffee and hospitality." You're really going to work in this storm? Marcus asked. The wind was howling now, and rain lashed the windows with increasing force. I've worked in worse, Elena said, though Marcus doubted that was true. Besides, once I get the excavation started, the worst part will be over. Marcus watched her gather her equipment and head back into the storm. Through his windows, he could see the lights of her truck and the bright beam of her work lamps as she set up near the fallen tree. Part of him admired her determination, but a larger part worried about her safety. He made another pot of coffee and settled in his living room with a book, glancing frequently toward the worksite. Elena moved efficiently despite the conditions, first using a small excavator attachment on her truck to carefully dig around the fallen tree. The work was slow and methodical, as she had to avoid damaging other utilities or the remaining sections of fiber cable. After about an hour, Marcus noticed the work lights had stopped moving. He looked out and saw Elena standing motionless beside her equipment, one hand pressed to her forehead. Something was wrong. Grabbing his rain jacket, Marcus hurried outside. The storm had reached its full fury now, with wind gusts that nearly knocked him off his feet. Rain fell in sheets so thick he could barely see 20 feet ahead. Elena, he called as he approached the worksite. Everything okay? She turned toward him, and, in the harsh glare of the work lights, he could see blood streaming down the left side of her face. Tree branch caught me, she said, raising her voice over the storm. Stupid mistake. I should have been more careful. Marcus examined the wound with his flashlight. A jagged cut ran from her hairline to just above her eyebrow, deep enough to need stitches. That needs medical attention. We should get you to the hospital. Nearest hospital is 60 miles away, Elena protested. And this storm is only going to get worse. The roads will be impassable soon. She was right about the roads. Marcus's driveway was already turning into a muddy stream, and the main road would be treacherous in these conditions. Then, come inside. I've got a well-stocked first aid kit, and I've had some medical training. Elena looked back at her partially completed excavation, clearly reluctant to abandon the job. Marcus could see her fighting an internal battle between professional duty and common sense. The cable isn't going anywhere, Marcus said gently. And you're not going to repair anything with a head injury in the middle of a thunderstorm. Finally, Elena nodded. She secured her equipment and followed Marcus back to the house, leaving her work lights running to mark the excavation site. Inside, Marcus led her to his bathroom and had her sit on the edge of the bathtub while he cleaned the wound. His hands were steady as he worked, a skill learned during his military service decades earlier. The cut was deep but clean, and it had already stopped bleeding heavily. You're going to have a nice scar, Marcus said as he applied butterfly bandages to close the wound. But it should heal fine if we keep it clean. Elena winced as he worked but didn't complain. Thanks. I've had worse injuries on the job, but usually not from flying tree branches. What made you choose this line of work? Marcus asked as he finished bandaging her forehead. It can't be easy being a female technician in what's probably a male-dominated field. Elena's expression grew distant. My father was a lineman for 30 years. Spent my childhood watching him fix things that kept communities connected. When he died, I decided to follow in his footsteps. Marcus heard the pain in her voice and didn't push for more details. Instead, he offered her dry clothes and suggested she rest while the storm passed. Elena accepted a clean shirt and sweatshirt but insisted she was fine to work as soon as the weather improved. They settled in Marcus's living room, listening to the storm rage outside. Despite her protests about getting back to work, Elena seemed grateful for the warmth and shelter. She examined his extensive library, asking questions about his reading preferences and sharing her own love of historical fiction. I never expected a telecommunications technician to be so well-read, Marcus admitted. Elena smiled for the first time since arriving. College degree in electrical engineering. I could have taken a desk job designing fiber networks, but I prefer working with my hands. Plus, I like the variety. Every job site is different, every problem unique. As the night wore on, the the storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be getting worse. Lightning flashed almost continuously now, and the thunder was so loud it shook the house. Marcus realized Elena would probably be stuck at his homestead until morning, possibly longer if the roads became completely impassable. The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. Marcus's backup generator kicked in automatically after a few seconds, restoring power to essential systems. But the brief darkness reminded both of them how isolated they were, how dependent on technology and infrastructure even in this remote location. Your fiber line isn't the only thing that's going to need repair after this storm, Elena observed, looking out at the lightning-split sky. Marcus nodded grimly. He'd weathered many storms on his homestead, but few with this level of intensity. Tomorrow would bring a long day of assessing damage and beginning repairs. At least he wouldn't be facing it alone. Dawn broke gray and subdued over the Montana wilderness. The storm had finally exhausted itself sometime around 4 in the morning, leaving behind a landscape transformed by wind and rain. Marcus woke early, as was his habit, and quietly made coffee while Elena continued sleeping on his living room couch. She'd finally succumbed to exhaustion around midnight, despite her repeated insistence that she needed to finish the cable repair. Looking out his kitchen window, Marcus surveyed the damage. His property had weathered the storm better than he'd feared, but there was still plenty of work ahead. Several large branches had fallen across his driveway, his greenhouse had lost some panels, and his chicken coop would need a new roof. But these were manageable problems for a man who'd spent years preparing for such emergencies. The real question was the state of the main road between his homestead and civilization. During severe storms, the dirt and gravel road often became impassable, sometimes for days. If Elena's truck couldn't make it out, she'd be stranded until the county road crew could clear the worst sections. Elena stirred on the couch, then sat up slowly, one hand going to the bandaged wound on her forehead. In the morning light, she looked younger and more vulnerable than she had during the storm. Her dark hair was still damp from the rain, and her borrowed clothes were too large for her small frame. "How's the head?" Marcus asked, bringing her a cup of coffee. "Sore, but functional," Elena replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Thanks for taking care of me last night. And for the dry clothes." "No problem. Though I should probably take another look at that cut, make sure it's healing properly." Elena submitted to Marcus's examination, sitting still while he changed the bandages. The wound looked good, with no signs of infection, though it would definitely leave a scar. As Marcus worked, he found himself studying her face more carefully. She had intelligent brown eyes and strong features that spoke of determination and resilience. "There," he said, finishing with the fresh bandages. "You'll live. Though you should probably see a real doctor when you get back to town." "If I can get back to town," Elena said, walking to the window to assess the damage outside. That road was already challenging in good weather. After last night's rain, it could be washed out completely. Marcus joined her at the window. "Only one way to find out. But first, let's get some breakfast in you. Then, we can check on your equipment and see about finishing that cable repair." Elena protested that she didn't want to be any more trouble than she'd already been, but Marcus waved off her concerns. He was enjoying the company more than he cared to admit. It had been months since he'd had a meaningful conversation with another person, and Elena's combination of intelligence and determination was refreshing. Over breakfast, Marcus learned more about Elena's background. She'd grown up in a small town in Colorado, the daughter of a utility lineman who'd taught her to respect both electrical power and the infrastructure that delivered it to people's homes. After earning her engineering degree, she'd deliberately chosen field work over office positions, preferring the variety and challenge of solving problems in real-world conditions. "Most of my male colleagues still don't take me seriously," Elena admitted. "They assume I can't handle the physical demands of the job, or that I'm just marking time until I find a husband and settle down." "Their loss," Marcus said. "From what I saw last night, you know your business better than most technicians I've worked with." Elena smiled at the compliment but quickly turned the conversation back to work. Speaking of which, I should check on my equipment and see how much damage the storm did to the excavation site." They finished breakfast and headed outside together. The morning air was clean and cool, washed fresh by the night's rain. Birds were already singing in the trees, and the oppressive humidity of the previous day had been replaced by crystal-clear visibility that stretched for miles across the wilderness. Elena's truck and equipment had weathered the storm well. Her work lights were still functioning, and the partial excavation around the fallen tree remained intact. But the site itself presented new challenges. The storm had saturated the ground, turning the work area into a muddy quagmire that would make digging treacherous. "I can work in these conditions," Elena said, surveying the situation. "But it's going to take longer than I originally planned." "No rush," Marcus replied. "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are you until that road improves." Elena shot him a questioning look. "What do you mean?" Marcus pointed toward his driveway, where a massive pine tree now lay across the gravel path about halfway to the main road. The tree was even larger than the one that had damaged his cable, easily 4 feet in diameter and stretching completely across the narrow drive. "I've got a chainsaw, but that's going to take hours to clear," Marcus explained. "And that's assuming the main road is still passable, which I doubt." Elena stared at the blocked driveway with obvious frustration. "I need to get back. I've got other service calls scheduled for today, and my supervisor will be wondering where I am." "Does your truck have a radio or satellite phone?" "Radio, but the nearest repeater is probably out of range from here. I tried to call in last night before the storm got really bad, but couldn't get through." Marcus considered their options. His own satellite phone would work, but the connection was expensive and unreliable. Still, it might be worth trying to contact Elena's company and explain the situation. "Let's focus on what we can control," he suggested. "You finish the cable repair, and I'll work on clearing that tree from the driveway. By the time we're both done, maybe the main road will have dried out enough to be passable." Elena nodded, though she still looked concerned about missing her other appointments. "Okay, but I'm paying for any materials I use. This isn't Mountain State's responsibility anymore. I'm technically off duty until I can report back. Don't worry about it. Just fix my internet connection so I can get back to the outside world." They spent the next several hours working on their respective projects. Marcus attacked the fallen tree with his chainsaw, cutting it into manageable sections that he could roll off the driveway with his small tractor. It was hot, physical work, but satisfying in a way that his former corporate career had never been. Meanwhile, Elena worked methodically to complete the cable repair. The muddy conditions slowed her progress, but her technique was flawless. She excavated carefully around the damaged section, cut out the crushed cable, and began running a new 60-foot section through fresh conduit. Every joint was precisely made, every connection tested multiple times. Around noon, Marcus took a break from his tree clearing to bring Elena lunch and something cold to drink. She was crouched beside her excavation, carefully splicing fiber optic strands under a portable work shelter she'd erected to keep the delicate connections dry. "That looks incredibly precise," Marcus observed, watching her work through a specialized microscope. "Fiber optic cable doesn't tolerate sloppy connections," Elena explained without looking up from her work. "Each strand has to be perfectly aligned, or you get signal loss and data errors. Some technicians rush through this part, but it always comes back to bite them later." Marcus admired her attention to detail. In his business career, he'd learned that the difference between good work and excellent work often came down to exactly this kind of meticulousness. It was clear that Elena took pride in doing things right, even when no one else would ever see the quality of her work. "How did you learn to do this?" Marcus asked. "It seems like it would take years to develop that level of skill." "My father taught me the basics when I was a kid," Elena replied, finally, looking up from her work. "He said that whether you're working with copper wire or fiber optic cable, the principles are the same. Respect the materials, take your time, and never assume you know what you're doing until you've tested everything twice." Marcus heard the affection in her voice when she mentioned her father. "He sounds like a wise man." Elena's expression grew sad. "He was. Lost him in a work accident 5 years ago. Electrical contact during a storm repair, similar to what I was doing last night. She paused, as if realizing something. Maybe that's why I was so determined to finish this job despite the weather. Dad always said you don't leave customers without power if you can help it. Marcus felt a pang of understanding. His own father had died when Marcus was young, and he knew how the loss of a parent could drive someone to prove themselves worthy of their memory. I'm sure he'd be proud of the work you're doing. I hope so, Elena said quietly, then returned her attention to the delicate splice work. Marcus resumed his own work, using the quiet afternoon to think about Elena's dedication. There was something almost heroic about her willingness to work through dangerous conditions to maintain connections that most people took for granted. His fiber optic cable was a luxury, not a necessity, yet she'd risked her safety to restore it because that was what the job required. By late afternoon, both projects were nearing completion. Marcus had cleared most of the tree from his driveway, leaving only a few large sections that would require more strategic cutting. Elena had completed the cable splice and was carefully burying the new section in the muddy trench she'd excavated. Want to test the connection? Elena asked as she finished backfilling around the cable. They walked back to Marcus's house, where Elena connected her test equipment to the fiber termination box. After a few minutes of measurements and calibrations, she smiled with satisfaction. Signal strength is perfect. Better than it was before, actually. The old cable had been degraded by moisture infiltration over the years. Marcus tested his internet connection and found it working flawlessly. Web pages loaded instantly, video calls connected with crystal clarity, and his email system synchronized without delays. The improvement was immediately obvious. Outstanding work, Marcus said. I don't know how to thank you adequately. Just pay the bill when it comes, Elena replied with a grin. Though I suspect this job is going to raise some questions when I submit my report. Not many technicians spend 36 hours on a single service call. As they were celebrating the successful repair, Marcus's satellite phone rang. The caller ID showed Elena's company number. That's probably my supervisor, Elena said, looking nervous. I should answer. The conversation was brief but tense. Elena explained her situation, emphasizing that she'd completed the original service call but was now stranded due to storm damage. Her supervisor was clearly unhappy about her missed appointments, but eventually agreed that there was nothing she could do until the roads became passable. Am I in trouble? Marcus asked when Elena hung up. Not yet, but I need to get out of here as soon as possible. My supervisor is already talking about sending another technician to check on me, which would be embarrassing for everyone involved. Marcus checked his watch. There's still several hours of daylight left. Let me finish clearing the driveway, and then we can try to make it to the main road. They worked together on the remaining tree sections, with Elena operating the tractor while Marcus ran the chainsaw. Her mechanical aptitude was evident as she smoothly maneuvered the machine, carefully positioning it to drag the heavy logs clear of the driveway. As the sun began to set, they finished clearing the last obstruction. The driveway was passable again, though still muddy and challenging. Marcus climbed into Elena's truck to help navigate the route to the main road, pointing out the worst muddy sections and the sharpest turns. The main road was in better condition than either of them had expected. The county had been through with graders and gravel trucks, clearing washouts and filling the worst potholes. Elena's truck handled the rough surface well, and within an hour they'd reached the paved highway that led back toward town. I can't believe we made it, Elena said, relaxing visibly as they reached smooth pavement. For a while there, I thought I might be living in your guest room permanently. Marcus chuckled. It wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world. I haven't had company that interesting in years. Elena glanced at him curiously. Don't you ever miss having people around? Living in the city, being part of a community? Sometimes, Marcus admitted. But I spent decades surrounded by people who only cared about money and power. Out here, I get to choose who I spend time with more carefully. They drove in comfortable silence for a while, watching the Montana landscape roll past in the golden evening light. Marcus found himself reluctant to see Elena leave. Their time together had reminded him of what he'd given up when he chose his isolated lifestyle. As they approached the telecommunications company's depot, Elena pulled into the parking lot and shut off the engine. "This is where we part ways," she said. "I need to file my report and prepare for tomorrow's service calls." Marcus climbed out of the truck and retrieved his overnight bag from the back. He decided to spend the night in town and drive his own vehicle back to the homestead in the morning, giving him a chance to pick up supplies and check his mailbox. "Elena," he said as she prepared to drive away. "Thank you for everything. Not just the cable repair, but for reminding me that there are still people who take pride in doing excellent work." Elena smiled, the expression transforming her serious features. "Thank you for the hospitality and the medical care. And for not treating me like I didn't know what I was doing." As Marcus watched her drive away, he felt a strange mixture of gratitude and loss. Their brief encounter had been a bright spot in what had become a somewhat lonely existence. He found himself hoping their paths might cross again, though he couldn't imagine any reason why they would. 3 weeks passed before Marcus saw Elena again. He'd returned to his routine of solitary homestead life, but found himself thinking about their encounter more often than he'd expected. Her competence and determination had impressed him, but it was her warmth and intelligence that lingered in his memory. Several times, he'd considered calling the telecommunications company with some minor issue, just for an excuse to request her specifically, but he'd always talked himself out of it. The autumn weather had been unusually mild following the severe storm, allowing Marcus to complete his own repairs without difficulty. His greenhouse was fully operational again, his chicken coop had a new roof, and he'd taken the opportunity to upgrade several other systems while he had the motivation for outdoor work. On a crisp Thursday morning, Marcus was working in his garden when he heard the familiar sound of a vehicle coming up his driveway. Looking up, he was surprised to see Elena's telecommunications truck approaching. His internet connection had been working perfectly since her repair, so he couldn't imagine why she'd be returning. Elena parked near his house and climbed out of the truck, carrying a small package. She looked more relaxed than during their previous meeting, though Marcus noticed she still bore a faint scar above her left eyebrow from her injury during the storm. "Don't tell me my cable is acting up again," Marcus called out as he approached. "No, your connection is fine," Elena replied with a smile. "I'm actually here on personal business. Do you have a few minutes?" Marcus wiped his hands on his work pants and gestured toward his porch. "Of course. Can I offer you some coffee?" "That would be great." They settled on Marcus's porch with steaming mugs, looking out over the wilderness that stretched endlessly in every direction. Elena seemed nervous, fidgeting with her coffee cup and glancing frequently at the package she'd brought. "I wanted to thank you properly for what you did during the storm," Elena began. "Taking care of my injury, letting me stay in your home, helping clear the road. That went far beyond anything you were obligated to do." "It was nothing," Marcus protested. "Anyone would have done the same." "Actually, that's not true," Elena said firmly. "I've been doing this job for 8 years now, and I've met all kinds of people. Most would have told me to call my company and wait for a rescue crew. Some wouldn't have even let me inside their house." Marcus considered this. His years in business had made him somewhat cynical about human nature, but his military service had also taught him the importance of helping others in crisis situations. "Maybe I just had a good example growing up. My father was career military, and he always said that character is revealed by how you treat people when they can't do anything for you." Elena nodded approvingly. "Your father sounds like a wise man. Which brings me to why I'm really here." She held up the package she'd been carrying. "This belonged to my dad. I thought you might appreciate it." Marcus opened the package carefully, revealing a beautiful wooden box with intricate carvings. Inside, nestled in custom-fitted compartments, was a complete set of precision electrical tools. Each piece was obviously expensive and carefully maintained, showing the wear that came from decades of expert use. "Elena, I can't accept this," Marcus said, though he couldn't hide his admiration for the craftsmanship. "These tools obviously meant a great deal to your father." "They did," Elena agreed. But, he always said tools are meant to be used, not displayed. Since his death, they've been sitting in my apartment, gathering dust. I thought about selling them, but it didn't feel right. Marcus lifted one of the tools, feeling its perfect balance and noting the care with which it had been maintained. Why give them to me? I'm not an electrician. Because you understand quality work, Elena explained. And because you treated me with respect when you had no reason to do so. Dad would have liked that. Marcus replaced the tool in its fitted compartment and closed the box. The gesture touched him deeply, not just because of the gift's obvious value, but because of what it represented. Elena was sharing something precious from her family history, trusting him with a tangible connection to her father's memory. I'm honored, Marcus said simply. I'll treasure these, and I promise they won't just sit unused. Elena smiled with obvious relief. Good. I was hoping you'd say that. She paused, then continued with apparent casualness. Actually, I was wondering if you might want to put them to use sooner rather than later. I could use some help with a project. Marcus raised an eyebrow. What kind of project? My grandmother lives about 20 miles from here, in an old farmhouse that's been in our family for 4 generations. The electrical system hasn't been updated since the 1960s, and it's becoming dangerous. I've been trying to rewire the place in my spare time, but it's a big job for one person. Wouldn't it be better to hire a licensed electrician? Elena shook her head. Grandma Rosa is on a fixed income, and she's too proud to accept charity. But she might accept help from a neighbor, especially if that neighbor happened to be learning about electrical work from someone who already knows what she's doing. Marcus began to understand. You're offering to teach me electrical work while we rewire your grandmother's house? Exactly. You'd be getting valuable skills, Grandma Rosa would get a safe electrical system, and I'd have help with a project that's been hanging over my head for months. Everyone wins. Marcus considered the proposal. He'd always been interested in learning more about his homestead's electrical systems, and the opportunity to work with Elena again was appealing for reasons he wasn't quite ready to examine too closely. What's your grandmother like? He asked. Elena's face lit up with obvious affection. She's 83 years old, about 4 feet 11 inches tall, and tougher than most men half her age. She emigrated from Mexico when she was 17, worked as a seamstress for 50 years, and raised 6 children essentially by herself after my grandfather died young. She sounds formidable. She is. But she's also one of the kindest people you'll ever meet. She'll probably try to feed you constantly and insist on hearing your entire life story. Marcus found himself smiling at the description. It had been years since he'd been around anyone like that, and the prospect was surprisingly appealing. When would we start? This weekend, if you're available. I usually spend Saturdays working on the house, and I could use an extra pair of hands to run new cable through the walls. Marcus looked out over his peaceful homestead, then back at Elena's hopeful expression. His routine was comfortable and predictable, but it had also become somewhat sterile. The idea of learning new skills while helping someone in need appealed to the part of him that missed having purpose beyond his own comfort. All right, he said finally. I'm in. But I insist on paying for materials. We can argue about that later, Elena said with a grin. Right now, let me show you what we're dealing with. She pulled out her phone and showed Marcus photos of her grandmother's electrical system. Even to his untrained eye, the wiring looked ancient and potentially dangerous. Cloth-wrapped cables ran through walls without proper protection, junction boxes were overstuffed with improvised connections, and several outlets showed signs of heat damage from overloaded circuits. How has she not burned the house down? Marcus asked. Careful living and good luck, Elena replied. But her luck won't last forever. Last month, she had a small electrical fire in the kitchen. That's when I decided this project couldn't wait any longer. They spent the next hour going over Elena's plans for the rewiring project. She'd already obtained all the necessary permits and planned the new electrical layout to modern safety standards. The work would require running new cables throughout the house, installing a new breaker panel, and upgrading all the outlets and switches. It's going to be physically demanding, Elena warned. Crawling through crawl spaces, working in tight attics, threading cable through walls that weren't designed for modern electrical systems. I'm in better shape than I look, Marcus assured her. And I'm not afraid of hard work. Elena studied him appraisingly. Actually, you look like you're in pretty good shape. All that Homestead living must agree with you. Marcus felt an unexpected pleasure at the compliment. At 55, he worked hard to maintain his fitness, but it had been a long time since anyone had noticed or commented on it. They finalized plans for the weekend work session, with Elena promising to pick Marcus up early Saturday morning. As she prepared to leave, Marcus found himself reluctant to see the visit end. Elena, he said as she walked back to her truck. Thank you for this opportunity. I haven't realized how much I was missing having meaningful work to do. Elena paused with her hand on the truck door. You know, I was thinking the same thing. Working alone all the time gets old, even when you enjoy what you do. Saturday morning arrived crisp and clear, with the first hints of autumn color beginning to show in the aspen groves. Elena arrived promptly at 7, bringing coffee and breakfast sandwiches for the drive to her grandmother's house. Fair warning, Elena said as they drove through the Montana countryside. Grandma Rosa is going to interrogate you thoroughly. She's been asking about you ever since I mentioned you were going to help with the electrical work. What did you tell her about me? That you're a neighbor who's interested in learning electrical work. She immediately assumed you were either my boyfriend or a potential boyfriend, and nothing I said could convince her otherwise. Marcus felt a slight warmth at the implication but tried to keep his voice casual. Should I be concerned about her interrogation techniques? Only if you're hiding any deep dark secrets. She has an uncanny ability to extract information from people. Elena's grandmother lived in a white farmhouse that sat on a small rise overlooking a valley dotted with hay fields. The building was well maintained despite its age, with a wraparound porch and flower gardens that showed obvious care and attention. Rosa Rodriguez met them at the front door, and Marcus immediately understood Elena's description. She was indeed tiny, barely reaching his chest, but her handshake was firm and her dark eyes were sharp with intelligence. She wore her silver hair in a neat bun and moved with the quick, efficient motions of someone accustomed to taking care of herself. So you are the neighbor who helped my Elena during the storm, Rosa said, looking Marcus up and down appraisingly. She told me you fixed her head and let her stay in your house. It was nothing, Mrs. Rodriguez. Anyone would have done the same. Rosa made a skeptical sound. Elena, take this man to see the electrical mess. I will make coffee and something to eat. The next several hours passed in a blur of activity. Elena showed Marcus the existing electrical system, explaining how to identify different types of wiring and the safety procedures for working with electricity. They started with simple tasks, having Marcus help thread new cable through the basement while Elena made connections and tested circuits. Marcus found the work absorbing in a way he hadn't expected. There was something satisfying about the methodical process of running new wiring, the precision required for proper connections, and the visible progress they made room by room. Rosa appeared periodically to check on their progress and provide food and drinks. True to Elena's warning, she subjected Marcus to gentle but persistent questioning about his background, his family, and his intentions regarding her granddaughter. You are not married? Rosa asked during one of these visits. Divorced, several years ago, Marcus replied honestly. Children? 2, both grown. My daughter lives in Portland, and my son is in graduate school in Boston. Rosa nodded approvingly. Elena works too much. She needs someone to remind her that life is about more than fixing cables and wires. Marcus glanced at Elena, who was pretending not to listen while she worked on a junction box. Elena seems to have her priorities well sorted out. She is a good girl, but lonely, Rosa continued with the directness of someone who felt age gave her the right to speak plainly. Ever since her father died, she throws herself into work to avoid thinking about anything else. The comment gave Marcus new insight into Elena's dedication to her job. He recognized the pattern from his own life after his divorce, when he'd buried himself in work rather than deal with the emotional aftermath of his marriage's failure. As the day progressed, Marcus found himself watching Elena work with increasing admiration. Her technical expertise was obvious, but it was her patience in teaching him that impressed him most. She never made him feel stupid for asking questions, and she took time to explain not just what to do, but why it needed to be done in a particular way. "You're a natural teacher," Marcus told her during a break. Elena looked surprised by the observation. "I've never thought of myself that way. Most of my colleagues would rather work alone than explain things to someone new. Their loss. You have a gift for breaking complex concepts down into understandable pieces." By late afternoon, they'd completed the rewiring of the kitchen and one bedroom. The progress was significant, though Elena estimated they still had at least 3 more weekends of work ahead of them. "I should probably head home," Marcus said as they began cleaning up their tools. "But I'd like to continue next weekend if that works for you." "Definitely," Elena replied quickly. "We make a good team." Rosa insisted on sending Marcus home with enough food for several meals, despite his protests. As Elena drove him back to his homestead, they discussed plans for the following weekend and the techniques he wanted to learn next. "Your grandmother is quite a character," Marcus observed. Elena laughed. "She likes you." "I can tell because she only made one comment about your age being appropriate for marriage and children." "Is my age inappropriate for marriage and children?" Marcus asked, surprised by his own boldness. Elena glanced at him sideways, a slight smile playing around her lips. "I wouldn't know. I haven't given it much thought." But the look in her eyes suggested she might have given it more thought than she was admitting, and Marcus felt a flutter of possibility that he hadn't experienced in years. Over the following weekends, their collaboration continued and deepened. Marcus proved to be an apt student, quickly mastering basic electrical techniques and taking on increasingly complex tasks. More importantly, he and Elena developed an easy working relationship built on mutual respect and shared goals. Rosa watched their partnership with obvious satisfaction, making increasingly pointed comments about how well they worked together and how nice it would be to have more young people around the old farmhouse. Her matchmaking efforts were transparent but good-natured, and neither Marcus nor Elena had the heart to discourage her completely. The electrical project became the highlight of Marcus's week. He found himself looking forward to Saturday mornings with an anticipation he hadn't felt in years. Working alongside Elena, learning new skills, and contributing to something that would improve Rosa's safety and comfort gave him a sense of purpose that his solitary homestead life had been lacking. As the weeks passed and the electrical work neared completion, Marcus began to worry about what would happen when the project was finished. Would Elena continue to visit, or would she return to her busy schedule and leave him to his comfortable but lonely routine? The question was answered on a cold November morning when Rosa announced that her old heating system had finally given up entirely. The furnace was beyond repair, and she would need to install a completely new system before winter set in properly. "I suppose I'll have to call a heating contractor," Rosa said with obvious reluctance, clearly dreading the expense. Marcus and Elena exchanged looks. "Actually," Marcus said slowly, "I've been thinking about learning more about heating and cooling systems. My homestead could use some upgrades too." Elena smiled with understanding. "And I happen to know quite a bit about HVAC installation. Maybe we could tackle this project together as well." Rosa's face lit up with delight, though she tried to hide it behind practical concerns about the cost and complexity of the work. But Marcus could see she was pleased at the prospect of having them continue their visits through the winter months. As they drove home that evening, Elena was unusually quiet. Finally, Marcus asked what was on her mind. "I was just thinking," Elena said carefully, "about how much I've enjoyed these weekends. Working on projects together, having regular conversations with someone who actually listens. It's made me realize how isolated I'd become." Marcus nodded. "I've been thinking the same thing. My homestead lifestyle is peaceful, but it's also pretty limiting. Having something meaningful to work on with someone I care about has been the best part of my week." Elena glanced at him with surprise. "Someone you care about?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks but decided to be honest. Yes. I care about you, Elena. More than I probably should, given how different our lives are. Elena was quiet for so long that Marcus began to worry he'd overstepped. But, finally, she pulled the truck over to the side of the road and turned to face him. Marcus, she said softly, I care about you too. I've been trying to convince myself it was just friendship, but I think we both know it's more than that. Looking into her eyes in the gathering darkness, Marcus felt a warmth and connection he hadn't experienced in years. Their unlikely partnership, born from a storm and a severed cable, had grown into something neither of them had expected but both had come to treasure. As they sat in the truck on that quiet country road, Marcus realized that sometimes the most important connections in life come from the most unexpected circumstances. A storm that had threatened to isolate him further had instead brought someone into his life who understood the value of competent work, genuine caring, and the courage to help others even when it's difficult. The future was uncertain, but, for the first time in years, Marcus felt genuinely excited about what lay ahead.